Miami season is done. From a turbulent offseason through 82 games of inconsistency and a postseason marred by injury, the long nightmare is finally over. We look at the whole damn mess of a year and what happens next on a live episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to a live episode of Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com. Joining me as always, credentialed Heat media member David Ramil. However you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go, the mobile hit twist on classic Monopoly. Join your friends and download Monopoly Go now for free on the App Store or Google Play. Thanks to everybody tuning in right after the buzzer of the final game of the Heat's season. We are live on YouTube right now after the Heat lost to the Celtics, got blown out again. They lose to the Celtics 4-1 in the series, eliminated from the playoffs. Season is over. We'll talk about what comes next for the Heat in a minute, but David, I want to start with this. I can't get upset about this loss. Not this one and not the series. The Heat were the most injured team in the league entering the playoffs. No Jimmy Butler, no Terry Rozier. They didn't even have Jaime Jaquez Jr. for this last one. They were going against a healthy Celtics team whose starting lineup played more than 600 minutes together and won most games in the league this season. Meanwhile, the Heat started a lineup this series that didn't log a single second with each other before this series. The average age, because of the injuries of the Heat starting lineup, was 24 years old. Of course they were going to lose this series. Of course they were. Even after that Game 2 win, of course they were going to lose this series. And I don't think, by the way, that Boston proved anything by winning this series. And I'm not going to get upset about the Heat losing it. It sucks that the Heat didn't have Jimmy Butler or Terry Rozier. I think this would have been a lot more competitive had they had them, but they didn't. Sometimes you just get a bad break. This season sucked, but I've already accepted that long before losing to the Celtics in this series. Where are you on this?
No, I'm right alongside there. Relieved. I don't know if that's like the right feeling, but
That's mine. That's fair.
As I mentioned yesterday, I thought, any win today, if it had happened, and it didn't, obviously, was just delaying the inevitable. And there was no chance for Miami. And they could not make it competitive without Jimmy and Rozier. And I know a lot of people will say, oh, they couldn't beat the Celtics with Jimmy. They couldn't beat him with Rozier after the trade had occurred. But it's a different animal in the postseason. You have a different chance to game plan and do things differently. Miami didn't have those options. They were missing a key player in Duncan Robinson, who struggled and has struggled since he came back from injury. And Miami's chances were limited. Even had they been fully healthy, it would have been a difficult challenge no matter what. And you have to give credit to Boston in that sense, because they were a good team, obviously the first seed in the Eastern Conference, and yet we never got a chance to see what a healthy roster would look like at all. Like, I mean, there were a few games maybe when this roster was as close to healthy as they got at any point, and other than that, it was just one thing after another. And you're kind of, at least from my perspective, my thought was, what, as bad as these 82 games were, we know that this team can and has played differently in the offseason. I'm not expecting, a dramatic upswing into three-point shooting like last year or anything like that, but we know that Jimmy plays differently when the focus is on the postseason. We know that the team focuses differently. We know that
Spoelstra,
yes, he can outcoach almost anyone in the postseason. We've seen that from him time and again. And yet it didn't really matter because your roster was just so shorthanded and you didn't have an opportunity to really do much of anything. And so, relief. Don't have to deal with Celtics fans anymore. I'm sure there's a few here in the chat, whatever. Go enjoy your limited postseason. You're not going to win the title anyway. You're going to have to wait for banner 18. But you know what? If you want to hang a banner of her beating Jaime Jaquez's corpse or whatever, and Patty Mills and
that's
Delon Wright, go for it.
I don't think, and I don't want to belabor the point really, because like the Celtics are the team that won the series. They're moving on, and they still have games to play. But if they were hoping that they were going to vanquish some kind of demon by beating the Heat, this was not the Miami Heat. This was a group of players wearing Miami Heat jerseys.
Yeah, sure.
And that almost comes off as disrespectful to the guys that were out there and Bam Adebayo, and we'll get to Bam and Tyler and all these guys later on. But this wasn't the team that they were hoping to get past, right? If you listened, and you and I were around the Celtics when they were here in Miami, obviously, and anytime it came up, they were saying, we're different than last year. We're different than last year. And maybe that's true, but by beating the Heat, this version of the Heat, they didn't prove that. Like that mental toughness, that physical toughness, all that stuff that they were trying to overcome and change from the last few years, they did not overcome that here. They're going to have to overcome that if they're going to win the championship. That's going to have to happen. Just because they beat the Heat now doesn't mean that it's going to be the case. And I'm just going to be interested to see if that happens. But I don't want to make this about the Celtics. They won. Congrats.
No, I don't either.
Move on. So it felt like you mentioned those for like those couple of weeks out of the year where this team was healthy, David.
Yeah.
And it felt like a dream almost. It didn't even feel real. You know what I mean? Like this season never really felt like it got started. And now it's over. And it's just weird. That defense of the Eastern Conference after last year's magical run to the finals never occurred. Right? Like it just felt like it was a wrestler with the championship belt, and he went into the ring to defend his title, and he twisted his ankle in his first step in the ring, and was in the hospital for the next few months. And that's just how I feel about this whole Heat season. I don't know what to make of this roster. I don't know what to make of this team other than disappointed because I never really felt like I got to see it for any long stretch. There was not even a single prolonged stretch this season of any kind of proof of concept of outside of like a 3 out of 4 game stretch, which is not prolonged. That don't count. But it was never like you want to see out of every team, like 2 weeks of just putting it together, right? Even the Clippers got that in January, and we just never got that. And for me, that's why you mentioned relief. I'm totally there. This season was not fun to watch. It was not very fun to cover. And I'm just being honest, like
No, I get you.
It never felt like we got in a rhythm here,
No, I mean, I think there's a recognition from the front office that has kind of been lost in the magic of last postseason. Like Miami played really, really well last offseason. Nothing that happens now, this gentleman's sweep, or even the tiresome 82 game stretch of the regular season, the play-in tournament, none of that can erase the magic of last postseason. But give credit to the front office. They recognize, you know what? You can't count on Magic striking again. You can't count on that. And so they understood that there were limitations to that roster, and that the loss of Tyler Herro in the first game of the playoffs against Milwaukee last year,
right,
and the fact that they were able to go into the finals anyway, they recognized, you know what? Maybe we can't afford to trade Tyler in order to make this roster significantly better and get a proven all-time great scorer in Dame Lillard. So you invest all that. That kind of hangs over the franchise as it's taking place. Like, I mean, if we're going back to the offseason here,
it took 2 months for that trade to happen, and then it didn't happen to Miami.
And it didn't happen. So you're kind of waiting there, and you're waiting there. It's like, a franchise blue balls of a sort, because you're kind of hoping that something gets relieved and nothing does. And then it's like, you know what? Now you're kind of stuck back in ground one. And you kind of have to look Tyler and be like, hey, sorry, we tried to trade you. It was for Dame. He's a top 75 player, but you're still our guy, right? We still love you.
I wrote about that.
And we want to,
for the Ringer, about how literally Tyler Herro was out to lunch with Eric Spoelstra in Coconut Grove, and they both get the Woj alert on their phone that Damian Lillard was traded to the Milwaukee Bucks. And you just got to imagine how and they were basically,
not
that was
awkward at all.
That was a little weird, And then they're like, well, I guess let's talk about the season. And they started talking about their plans for the season. And then, of course, Tyler Herro gets hurt for a long time during the regular season and all these things.
Right.
And we'll talk about what this playoff series meant for Tyler and his future in Miami in a second. But you got me thinking here, and it's something we've talked about a little bit before, but you're absolutely right. Like those 2 months of thinking you're going to get Damian Lillard, and then it doesn't happen. And then the season has to start basically within the week after Lillard gets traded to Milwaukee. And now the Heat are like, maybe I would bet you that the Heat, even though the trade never materialized, had plans of, okay, what does this look like if we have Damian Lillard? You got to start thinking about that when you enter those sort of negotiations, right? And so now, then you have to sort of rejigger, and then you're like, okay, is Kyle Lowry the starting point guard? Is he not? And then you've got Lowry in training camp in Boca Raton saying that he imagines himself. And so you've kind of got like, we don't really know what the starting five is going to be or the closing five is going to be to start the season when the team was healthy. let alone when the team got hurt later on. And so you've got that hanging over the team. Let me ask you a what if, David.
Yeah.
Or maybe not a what if, or a shoulda, woulda, coulda type thing. You know what? I'm gonna ask you this question, then we'll get to Tyler Herro's future and Bam Adebayo's playoff series. We'll talk about all that next year on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets, Major League Baseball, NHL tickets, concert tickets, comedy shows, whatever you're looking for. You'll find it all on Game Time. They're all in pricing. That's the feature that shows the total up front, so there's no surprise fees. I know that sometimes you go to Ticketmaster or other places, and you know what? Sometimes you get slapped with a tax fee or an arena fee or something else. Well, guess what? There's no concern about that with Game Time. You know exactly what you're getting. Sometimes if you use your last-minute ticket prices, you can get tickets cheaper than if you bought them an hour early. That's how convenient.
That's how I go to Marlins games.
That's right. You just go in there after the first pitch.
It's a half-hour drive for me. Yeah, I don't care about the first inning of Marlins. Nobody, even the Marlins don't care about the first inning of Marlins games anymore.
Boom.
Get the cheap tickets. Get a hot dog. Have a good time.
Yeah. So go to download the Game Time app today, create an account, and if you use the code LOCKEDONNBA, get $20 off your first purchase. Now, terms do apply, but if you create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, you get $20 off. So download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. Before we get to some of our listener questions, before we get to Tyler Herro's future, did we see Tyler Herro in a Heat jersey for the last time?
Yeah. Can I just respond real quickly? I love Celtics fans. You're so bored with your own life. You can't even celebrate your run here. Your 5-game win over Miami.
Welcome to our live stream.
Thank you for boosting our numbers. We appreciate it. Yeah. You guys coming into our mentions, you're helping the algorithm. We've made more money off your loser asses than you had possibly hoped for. So thank you so much for all of your support.
They're just content consumers, David.
They're not. No, because they're attacking me. Guy on the right, this guy, clown, this is for you. Like, I don't care. I cover the team. It's okay. Don't worry about it. They're the ones that are dealing with the loss, not me. It's okay. Believe me, I live.
The shoulda, woulda, coulda part. This is what I was going to ask you, David.
I'm fat, apparently, according to one of the commenters here. Sorry, right. It's just
okay.
Too much.
It's just the comments, David. Let's have a conversation here.
Let's do it.
The shoulda, woulda, coulda. After the Heat did not land Damian Lillard, they go to the season. Questions about the roster still. Are you with me now that they should have traded for James Harden?
Oh, that's hard to say. Yeah, I guess so. I mean, in hindsight, I guess it makes a lot of sense. But there are lots of moves that we could have looked like that. I mean, would you think Bradley Beal would have made this roster better? I don't.
Just because he's hurt, and it's not like a fluky hurt for Phoenix this year. He's hurt all the time. He was hurt for the last few years in Washington. So I was never, and the same goes for Zach LaVine, you know? Like, I'm not really into the Beal or LaVine deals, but Harden is durable, man. Like, say what you want of James Harden. There's a lot of things to say about James Harden. There's plenty to criticize. The one thing you can't criticize is that guy doesn't play basketball games. That guy shows up and plays basketball games. And in the regular season, he's an innings eater. He's an offensive floor raiser the way that Bam Adebayo is a defensive floor raiser. It would have been nice to have a head of the snake like that for the regular season. And if you do have that player, James Harden's having a fine series for the Clippers right now, but you're probably not in the play-in tournament. You probably have home court advantage in the first round in the Eastern Conference. Jimmy Butler's probably healthy for this playoff run, at least to start it. You know, like, obviously I know it doesn't work that way, but it's like, you're not in the play-in tournament. Kelly Oubre's not landing on Jimmy Butler's knee. You know, we know that wouldn't happen. So I don't know. Is there any other regrets that the Heat should have for how this season played out in your mind? Because that to me is the one the Clippers got Harden for like a pick and Nick Batum and Robert Covington. It's like, you could have done that. You know, you basically made that deal essentially for Terry Rozier at the deadline, you know, and I think Harden would have been better to have than Terry Rozier. Terry Rozier has been fine, but I would have rather had Harden.
Yeah, I
So
just
I
don't
don't
know
know.
that Philadelphia. I don't know that Philadelphia would have made that deal with Miami. So I don't know how
Maybe not
likely that
send
was.
him to the West instead. That's certainly possible. It's certainly possible. All right. Did we see Tyler Hero's last game in a Heat jersey? What do you think?
I, you know, my my first reaction is to say yes, but the more I think about it and the layers to it, and it's always going to be a difficult conversation, and I hate having it. I know a lot of people have chastised me for being a hero hater while you've been a hero apologist and everything else like that. But I obviously I think our perception of Tyler is much more nuanced than what people believe or take at face value. My feeling is also one, his value decreased, and last summer was so difficult in terms of how Heat fans and opposing fan bases and even opposing media members and what they saw from Tyler and his value. And certainly that run to the finals didn't help his value any. And yet he suffered injury. He was somewhat inconsistent. He made some strides as a defender and playmaker. But when he had the opportunity to carry this team and to show that he had not superstar, but star potential, he kind of withered in the moment. And that's a tough pill to swallow. But it's also the reality. I still think he has room for growth. He's so young and he is talented and he is a good scorer, but he really struggled this series. It did nothing to help that value. So if you're talking about a potential trade, what are you going to get for Tyler that's of requisite value? What are you going to get? You want to be able to make a deal that's going to improve this roster. Just trading him away, and as some people have said, for like a bag of peanuts, that's not helping this roster. It doesn't do anything. And so, what can you get for a player like Tyler Herro? Are you going to get two competent role players and maybe a couple second rounders down the road that might not convey or something like that? Yeah, I guess potentially you could get something like that that's of some value. I still don't know that it's of the kind of value that Tyler can theoretically represent. And that's still, what the Heat front office is doing right now. They're still kind of looking at what Tyler is and they kind of judge his potential and what they've seen from him in the past and this season and say, you know what, we kind of still like what we can become and we still believe in him. I don't know.
I want to go back
really
to something
don't know.
you said. I want to go back to something you said about having an opportunity here and not making the most of it, because I think it's worth getting into here. Against the Celtics, no Jimmy Butler, no Terry Rozier. Tyler Herro's the lead offensive player. And he was incredible in game 2. Eric Spoelstra telling him it was the best playmaking game of his career. He was scoring efficiently and all those things. And then the Celtics put the clamps on him. They put Drew Holiday on him. They put Jason Tatum on him. And he couldn't score against them. Not for his fault, but he's just got physical limitations that we all know about. And Tatum's length and Holiday's length and strength just bother him. And I feel bad for Herro because he's been wanting this, right? He's been wanting an opportunity to be like, I'm the guy. Yeah. I can lead this offense. Yeah. And man, in game 2, did it look like he was the guy. It really, really did. But for the rest of the series, 11 points, 15 points, 19 points. And then in this game, the closer, 15 points. He shot 30% in 3 of the 5 games. The playmaking wasn't there outside of game 2. 3 assists tonight, 4 assists in the first game, 6 combined assists in the last 2 games outside of that 14 assist game.
Yep.
He didn't rise to the occasion. And I don't know how much at fault he is for that. I just think that we have seen now Tyler Herro's ceiling. And that is a good player, but not the best player on a good team. It is a helpful player, but not a guy who can be in the same conversation as Luka Doncic and Trae Young and these guys that he considers himself with. And so when you consider that, I think there needs to be an acknowledgement by the front office that, hey, this guy's a 6th man of the year candidate. This guy is a 6th man of the year winner. If he were to just be a 6th man, we might have the best 6th man in the league. And I think you could have a claim to that. Who won 6th man this year? Malik Monk or... Naz Reid. So you get Naz Reid, Malik Monk, Bogdan Bogdanovic. Those are the finalists. And Tyler Herro is as good, if not better, than those players. And could certainly, if he were to just accept a 6-man role, he could win another. He would probably win. I would bet on him winning another one of those awards at some point in his career.
Yeah.
Is he willing to accept that? Is the question. And does this playoff series change his own view of himself? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. You'd have to ask Tyler. And even if you did, he might deny it to the death. But
I wouldn't think so.
I think that when we talk about what his value is, that's his value, is a team in need of scoring punch off the bench as a sixth man, as an occasional starter, as a guy who is an elite catch and shoot and pull-up shooter from three-point range, who does have some defensive limitations, but if you need a spark on offense, he could give you that basically every night. The guy averaged 20 points per game, and he's done it now 3 years in a row. So this guy's a legit bona fide scorer, a top 100 player in the NBA. If you traded him, you could get the equivalent of a first-round pick or a good starter for him, depending on the team that you're trading him to. But you're not trading him as a centerpiece for Donovan Mitchell or Kevin Durant or Damian Lillard. And I think that's probably where the league and where this Heat front office has to settle on his value.
The problem is also his contract too. Like you're talking about,
it's not that bad. I know that's out there. It's not that bad. It's $25 to $30 million a year. The cap is going up. It's not that bad.
That's a lot for a sixth man, even a super sixth man.
Maybe. I mean, Malcolm Brogdon's making $20 million a year.
That's a whole other story.
It's a little bit more, but he's got a ceiling. You're not wrong. It's not a great contract, but I don't think it's a huge problem either. You know, I think there's other players making around that amount of money that you can make a lateral move for. And there's a lot of teams with cap space this year that are not going to have, like, if the Heat were to call Detroit or Orlando, teams with cap space who are not going to really be able to use it on free agents just because they're not really free agent destinations necessarily.
Okay.
You know, those teams would at least have a meeting about it. Same. Yeah, those teams would have a meeting about it, you know? Like that Herro helps those teams.
I could see Pop wanting to take a chance on a young player like Herro who's been coached up in Miami.
Yep. Import some
market
culture.
you could market it as the duo of the future between him and Wemby. I mean, I don't know. Who knows how realistic that is. It's really tough, you know, and it's even tough to have the conversation now because I think you and I obviously were both hopeful or expected, not even hope necessarily, just expected Tyler to be able to rise to the moment. And the fact that he didn't, and the fact that he struggled so much is kind of not just disappointing, but also really surprising. Like I thought there would be, you're not surprised that he struggled as much as he did. Like
you got to understand,
didn't have a 20-point game in the series.
No, I mean, Boston, they have really good wing defenders, and and long wing defenders, and that's what Tyler Herro struggles with. He can't, when the Celtics were able to put their best two defenders on Tyler Herro the entire time he was in the game, all series. All series, Boston was like Drew Holiday, Jason Tatum. You're on Tyler Herro. If Jimmy Butler is out there, if Terry Rozier is out there, you can't do that. You know, like Terry Rozier, like if it's Derek White, who's a good defender, but or whoever else, if it's somebody else on Tyler Herro the entire time, Peyton Pritchard and just part of a second unit, then Tyler Herro cooks. You know, but we know now he's not the guy who could beat the best defender on the other team, and that's it. And I've known this for a long time. And I think a certain amount of Heat fans expected more from Tyler Herro. And I think the front office was hopeful he could take that next step. But he's too slight. He's too skinny. He's not strong. You watch Donovan Mitchell, that guy is strong, man. You put Drew Holiday in front of him, he barrels through him. Jimmy Butler, you put Drew Holiday in front of him, he just shoots over him. Tyler Herro does not have that physical strength. Those are the inherent physical limitations that we always talk about with him. And so that's fine. But it limits you. It puts a ceiling on you. And I think we've probably reached essentially the ceiling of his prototype. He could get better as a sixth man, but I don't think he's ever going to get to the point where he's the number one scorer on a team. The problem is, I don't know that he can acknowledge that while in Miami. And that's why a change of scenery might have to be done for him to acknowledge that humble pie that you get served when you're part of a trade. And then you take on that role somewhere else.
Why do you say he can't do it in Miami?
Because he's been told the entire time for the last 3 years that he's a starter. 2 years.
Has he been told that, or has he told the front office that?
Either way, they've.
I know they've acquiesced.
Either way, they've enabled it. So he has
2 years of him as a starter.
Yeah, they have signaled to him, "You're a starter." And even when he came off the bench for Duncan Robinson, they kept saying, "You're our sixth starter. You're our starter's minutes. We're just doing this for now." They have it. It's a tough about face. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it would be difficult. And I just imagine that what would have to happen. You just see this across the league. Like what has to happen is a change of scenery is usually needed. And you know, it's a little bit different after that. So we'll see. Let's talk a little bit more. We'll talk about Tyler Herro a little bit more later when we get to some of our listener questions. I have a take on Bam Adebayo. And it's a lot more rosy than the conversation we just had about Tyler Herro. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. But you know what? There is so much up in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends in time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get, from unique stickers you can trade with a friend to complete albums for big prizes. You can get cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their building or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot pachinko machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, a classic game, but now you can download it for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Make sure you're subscribed on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. We'll get to your listener questions here in a little bit as we go long on our season finale episode here today.
For
Last point on Tyler Herro.
Long season, long finale. It feels right.
Yeah. If the playoff series was beneficial in any way, I just think it helped everybody realize those limitations in Tyler Herro and just get a good grasp on what his value is in the NBA. And I still think he's a top 100 player. I think he could be the best sixth man in the league, and that's a really good player. But it's time to settle in and have that and acknowledge that and have that realization. So let's talk a little bit more about Bam Adebayo. What an awesome series for Bam. I know it gets lost in the fact that you just got you got your doors blown off by Boston in 4 out of 5 games. But you talk about stepping up to the occasion. Bam did. He averaged 22.6 points on 49% shooting, 9.4 rebounds, and 3-point assists. You could poke holes in the game, maybe too many post-ups that were inefficient and all those things. But my counter to that is, what else are the Heat supposed to do? 2 of their key starters are hurt. Jimmy Butler's out. Bam Adebayo did his best. And all while providing terrific defense, the linchpin of a defense that did limit Boston's number 1 rated offense. Defense was not the problem for the Heat in this series, right? And Bam's obviously the big part of that. It's just that they couldn't score. So Bam has scored 20 points now in 10 straight playoff games. I think that's the stat. This guy is a playoff performer. And just because the Heat got gentlemanly swept in the first round this time does not take away from that.
No, it's interesting though, because I think a lot of people still don't recognize his value, and it's a very boring conversation to have and have had for years now. Like, if you can't recognize what it is that Bam brings to the table on a nightly basis, I don't know. And again, a lot of it is, if you want to call it that, and Eric Spoelstra certainly can. It's just, his contract is what it is, but there's no denying the value. Like, I think fans are just so used to saying your value must equate this, like a 25.
Do you think he doesn't? Do you think he's not worth the contract?
I think he's the best player on the roster, to be honest with you. I think he was the best player
you and I
early in the season, and I still think he's one of the best players. I mean, I think he's one of the best players in franchise history. So I really do believe that he's certainly worth the contract. It's just, again, there are still nights with Bam, and look, the argument is, well, he's not a top player. He can't carry you to a franchise. Maybe he shouldn't have to. He's not a top 5 player in the NBA. He never will be. At least I don't think so.
No.
But he can reach top 10, 15-ish player. Like, he can be what Jimmy Butler was, what Jimmy Butler has been in a Heat uniform. I think that's maybe what his ceiling could be, which is still like a really good defender and a guy who can play offense inconsistently, but at a higher level. I still think there's another level for Bam to develop as far as an offensive player, and I think the 3-point shot is that next phase. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he's a 35% shooter from 3 next year with like a couple attempts per game. I think that we've seen it enough where it's going to be in his bag moving forward. And given that, I think you'll see that kind of uptick in his offensive production. And that makes him a much more dangerous player. And if he's still going to contribute defensively, he's still going to make plays. He's still going to, I mean, look, he's got limitations. He always will, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he's still a very, very, very good player. And he's incredibly valuable to what this Heat franchise is looking to accomplish.
Bam Adebayo is a floor raiser, and maybe one of the best floor raisers in the league. And that's really hard to see for the average fan. I just think it's hard to evaluate. It's hard to see. We get so accustomed to just assuming that the Miami Heat are going to have an elite defense and don't really ask the question about why they have an elite defense. And it's not because of their best-in-class development program, right? It's not Caleb Martin and Haywood Highsmith that are turning the Heat into a top 5 defense in defensive rating. It's not Jimmy Butler because he doesn't play 25 games out of the year. It's Bam Adebayo. It's Bam. Bam is the reason. There's a reason why he's a Defensive Player of the Year finalist and a perennial Defensive Player of the Year candidate. I think Bam is the best defender in the NBA. I think even if we don't even have to talk about best. The most balanced, the most versatile, the most plug and play. There is not a system that you can't run with Bam. Yeah. Even with Rudy Gobert, you can't run a switch everything scheme because he can't switch out to the perimeter as well as Bam. We saw with Jonathan Isaac. Like, people want to anoint him the best defender in the league because the guy plays 15 minutes a night for Orlando during the regular season, and then they start him in the first round against the Cavs, and they wipe the floor with him because he's too slight and he can't rebound with Jared Allen. Bam does not have that problem. Bam's not too slight. That dude's one of the strongest players in the league. Miami's his rebounding numbers aren't Andre Drummond level, but Miami's defensive rebounding rate with him on the court is best in the league. Defensively, you can do any scheme. Zone, man-to-man, switch everything. Level of the screen, drop, whatever you want to do. Bam does it all. So if you're a coach constructing a defense from scratch, I think the guy you would probably pick is Bam to start your defense. If you had to start an elite defense right now, today, pick-up game, defense wins it. Bam's the guy that you pick because you could put any amount of players around him and you're going to have a top 10 defense in the NBA. And I think that's really hard for people to recognize. What he's not is a ceiling raiser. He's not somebody, to your point, who can lead you to a championship. But he can create the foundation for that ceiling raiser to lead you to a championship. And that's Bam's value, and that's why he's the only untouchable player on this roster, to me.
Maybe.
And so that's where I'm at with Bam Adebayo. Did we see the limitations in his offensive game? Yeah. He should not be posting up 8 times a game, but he had to because Jimmy Butler and Terry Rozier weren't there, and because Tyler Herro had 2 of Boston's best defenders draped all over him. He's not a post-up player. That's okay. But going forward, to me, the question is, how do we surround Bam with more talent so that he doesn't have to do that? If Bam was our third scorer, could you imagine? Nobody would be asking for him to score 30 points per game. Nobody would be asking for aggressive Bam. He would be doing his job and on all those other things. And if you had somebody that could run pick and roll and make things easier for him, then even better. You know,
that was the idea. That was the idea with this roster. You had Tyler, you had Jimmy. Those are ostensibly your top 2 scorers. You had Terry Rozier you run pick and roll with, and we saw that combination working. Yeah, it did.
It worked for a long time. And then Jimmy got hurt. Now he's going to be 35, and now you got big questions. And now he's up for an extension this summer, and you've got a lot of questions about this roster that may have seen its window close at TD Garden tonight. So that's really what you're dealing with. Let's do one question now, and then we'll save the rest of our questions for like the longer portion of this podcast. So anybody watching on the live stream, we are not going anywhere. We are not leaving. We are going to do another question here. We're going to say a fake goodbye. That's going to be the goodbye for our audio portion. We just got to do this to pay the bills here, and then we're going to continue along. So start getting those questions in right now if you're in the live chat, and we'll try to answer as many as we can here. But let's get to a question here. Let's do this one. Will Jimmy Butler get a ring before he retires? From Bernardo.
My guess would be no.
I think it's going to, and if that's the case, that's all right. I think it's all right. But they might get one more shot at this. All right. Let's get to some of our listener questions next. Real quick, before we get to those questions from the live chat, just want to say thank you to everybody who followed along and listened or watched the show this season. It sucks that the season ended the way that it did, with a whimper, with an injured whimper from the hospital bed. But we are not going anywhere. We have a ton to talk about over the next few months. It is going to be a potentially wild offseason, of rumors and all those things, and we will have original reporting. We will be covering all the rumors. We'll be reading all the tea leaves over the next few months about what the Heat are going to do. It is going to be a very interesting offseason. You are going to want to stay with us throughout it, and you're going to want to stay with us right here. We're going to play the outro credits. We're going to come back with some more of our listener questions. All right. Back for the fun part, David. Listener questions. Let's jump in. Jacob writes in, do we see a ceiling for Nikola Jovic on this team?
A ceiling on this team? I don't know.
A ceiling for Nikola Jovic. I don't know. I don't know what this on this team means, but that was the question.
Yeah, it's tough to say because right now, again, like we're talking about the hierarchy and who is supposed to do what, and right now, like there isn't a very clear place for Nico to stand out. Like I think he has a lot of potential, and he certainly showed a lot of improvement over the course of the season from where he was, like basically out of the rotation to start the year to a starter in the postseason, and a guy who was willing to shoot, who could bring the ball up, who could defend at a much higher level than a lot of people had seen and a lot of people expected. And he wasn't a guy you could play off the floor. And yet, you saw even tonight, like Eric Spoelstra started the third quarter wanting to go small. And the guy to take out is maybe the one that creates the most mismatches. So I don't know. I can't understand exactly how Spo views Nikola's development and what his role in that hierarchy might be. I don't know. I think he's a very good player, and I think he's a good player right now. I think he has potential to be a very good player. I just don't know also how realistic it'll be that he can achieve that here in Miami, given the current state of the roster.
Well, he's a starting power forward. He's a great fit next to Bam Adebayo.
Fifth option on that starting lineup.
Oh, that's fair. He's 20. Like
They
he's the
gotta
fifth option
change
right now.
If they were healthy,
5 or 6 years, Jimmy's going to be retired. Like who knows? And that's okay. This is a guy who was picked at the end of the first round. I don't know that the expectation was for him to ever be the number one option or the number two option on a good team, So it's if the Heat found a long-term starting power forward, that is a huge hit. You and I did a whole breakdown of the kind of player you get at the end of the first round before the Heat made that pick, just trying to set expectations of what the Heat are really looking at here, And he's already blown those expectations away, which sounds extreme, but you look at the history of late first round picks and it's not, like the Jimmy Butlers of the world, few and far between. The Nikola Jovic's of the world, a starter on a playoff team by his second season, few and far between. And so I think he's awesome. I think he's a value add to this team. This team needs to run. When we talk about building around Bam, get out in the full court, in transition, push the pace. That's what this team needs. And one thing I learned about Nico in this playoff series, David, the dude's ready. He's not afraid of the light. He is not afraid of the competition. He's ready to go. So I think that he'd have a really good player. Stan Van Gundy was singing his praises on the broadcast tonight. A lot of people have. Other coaches have recognized the development and the progress that he's made. In terms of what his ceiling is, I don't know. I think realistically, I don't know that he'll ever reach the heights of like prime Danilo Gallinari, and I don't know how many people really remember how good Gallo was when he was like a 20-point per game scorer. And I don't know that Nico will ever score 20 a game. It really, like to your point earlier, David, it depends on the roster and the team and what his responsibilities are. But a player who could space the floor, be a rebounder, push the pace, and be a matchup kind of wrench that other teams have to deal with. Yeah, that's the kind of player that we're talking about. So
6'10" guard. I mean, that's basically what he is.
Right? Yeah.
Do you think any of his success over the last few weeks leading up to the postseason was a result of, we have never really seen what this guy can do. We haven't really scouted him. And do you think teams adjust next year to kind of limit what he can do? I mean, I guess it all depends on whatever roster is composed next season, but in terms of Nico and how other teams view him, will they be aware that this guy can push the pace, can shoot from the perimeter, and can defend at a higher level?
He talked to us, like even during the season, people started closing out on him, right? Like there was real-time adjustments from opposing scouting reports of, hey, this guy's a shooter, close out. We saw that. the beauty of Nikola Jovic being on this team is that he's not the number one guy you're worrying about on the scouting report. He's not the number two guy you're worrying on the scouting report. He's not the number three guy you're worrying on the scouting report, right? Like, teams are still going to put one of their worst defenders on Nikola Jovic. You're not going to put your best defender on him. That makes no sense on a team with Bam and Jimmy and whoever else is on this roster next year. So I think he's going to be able to eat the scraps for a while, and that's
he's got to
exactly
take advantage
of
those.
He's
got to take advantage of the mismatches too. Like, too many times you saw a smaller guard. He's got to get stronger, and he's already shown that.
Yeah.
Yes, he will. I think so. I really do. I think now he's got a clear idea of what's needed of him, and he's got the experience of, like, I played in the NBA against good teams, and I know what to expect.
What is this next question comes from Eric. What does this playoff series? Oh, wait. First, before we get to this question, sorry, I flagged this. Nick writes in from the chats, will you still make videos throughout the playoffs? Yes, we are not going anywhere throughout the playoffs. Off-season for the Heat starts now. Playoffs for the rest of the league continues. For most of the rest of the league continues. We're going to keep covering. And you and I will talk about the playoffs a little bit on here, but we'll be talking a lot about the Miami Heat still throughout the playoffs. Yeah. So we are not going anywhere. Still going 5 days a week strong here. Next question comes from... who was it? Eric. What does this playoff series say about the team? First part of the question. Second part of the question. What moves do you see coming in the offseason? Put a pin in the second part, David. First part. What does this playoff series say about our team? And the more we talk, you know what? That was my initial reaction, but the more we talk about it, I think we've learned something here. I think we have learned, if we didn't know already, what Tyler Herro is as a player. And that's okay.
That's fair.
I think we have learned that Bam Adebayo doesn't care who he's on the court with. He's going to go after it. This was the hardest playoff series of Bam Adebayo's career, and he rose to the occasion. I think that says not that we needed any extra, stamping on Bam Adebayo being a franchise player, but it helped. And then I think we learned about Nikola Jovic, and I think we learned about Jaime Jaquez being playoff-capable players. And I'll say this, too. We got an interesting glimpse at what this team looks like without Jimmy Butler. We kind of got to look into the future a little bit. Bam's only 26 years old. Yeah. Tyler's 24. Nico's 20. Jaime just turned 23 recently. That's a young team. What does that team look like going forward? I think we have an idea that a lot of those guys play well together. And then you also learn what do we need on top of that, right? You need obviously a number one scorer because your number one scorer was in street clothes. But, I think that's interesting, and I think the front office can have some takeaways when they reflect on this series. Not a ton, but something. I don't think it's nothing. We're going to keep that pin in the offseason conversation here. Hurricane 07 writes in, this is why injuries happen, to put a target on Tyler Herro to see how he's going to perform in the playoffs without Jimmy Butler. Remember now that Tyler said that he wants to be a starter and he wants to be mentioned as a superstar. This is a test that he could have passed, but he had a trash performance tonight. Kind of what we were saying before.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate. Okay. Let's see. What else do we have here?
Do you think, look, so there was some talk about Miami considering Zach Edey. We'll get to draft talk, of course, throughout the whole summer leading up to the draft and everything else like that. Yeah, guy from Purdue. I don't think he's a right fit for Miami. As good a college player as he was, and a lot of people are saying he's got the temperament for Heat culture, whatever. Maybe. I don't know that he's the right fit. He adds size. Does Bam's three-point shooting open up the opportunity for him to slide down to the 4 if you can get another big that complements him as a rim protector? Yeah.
That's
can
an
he
avenue
take the leap that Karl Anthony Towns took this year?
What? Karl Anthony Towns. Bam? Karl Anthony Towns take a leap in terms of being a catch shooter?
Well, a guy who plays off of Rudy Gobert.
I think Bam can play next to another center, to answer your question. He'll never be Cat in terms of being a perimeter shooter.
Sure.
But nobody really was outside of Dirk.
I don't know. It's Karl Anthony Towns is a good shooter. He's
a great shooter.
Game changer, according to him, right? What was the quote that he said as a shooter?
Like
but the only time we've seen him play with a center was when he had either Kelly Olynyk or Myers Leonard, and both of those guys were able to space the floor so that they wouldn't be clogging the area where Bam.
I understand the point you're making, and now that Bam is shooting threes, it doesn't make that prototype center necessary if Bam can develop that 3-point shot. And I'm with you. I think that's really important. And whether it's Zach Edey or anybody else, I would very strongly consider, if I were the Heat's front office, getting a center who could just a big 7-foot body who can play next to Bam. Bam goes to power forward, starts shooting threes a little bit more. And it doesn't have to be your forever lineup. You'll still get the Bam at center plenty. But just to reduce the wear and tear on him throughout the 82-game regular season would be very valuable to me. To me, the big lesson from this year, David, is we got to figure out a way to stay healthy through the first 4 or 5 months of the season, because it's too much of this of being worn out by the time the playoffs come around, which has happened every year. You know, Bam talked about it. Even though the Heat were technically healthy outside Tyler Herro in the finals against the Nuggets, Bam talked about this to Brian Windhorst. He said, I was out there, but I was beaten down by the end of that playoff run. And if you can just sort of reduce that wear and tear for 5 months during the 82-game regular season, that goes a long way. You know, and if Bam's starting to shoot threes, opens up the optionality in terms of what kind of 7-footer you could place next to him. It doesn't have to be Brook Lopez or a Miles Turner type. Maybe it is just a Zaza Pachulia, you know? Like
somebody's mentioning here, Jonas Valanciunas.
Sure. I would go, yes. Why not? Not a game changer, but also, you know, you can get him at the mid-level exception. It wasn't a great year for him. You got basically played off the floor in the playoffs, but you don't need him like at that level. If you can get him at the mid-level exception, he could just be a fill-in starter for you and a big body. I would love Valanciunas at the mid-level. I think that'd be a great move. Coach Alex Lewis writes in, what was the real point of even making the playoffs? Only thing that could come from it was Tyler tanking his trade value and more injuries. Nico and Jaime look good all year when they got consistent minutes and touches, so young guys getting reps is a terrible answer. What do you think? Was there a point in even making the playoffs?
Absolutely. I mean, you always have to try to win. Like, no team has ever benefited from not winning and consciously pursuing losing. Like, it just doesn't work. Like, it sets a bad precedent. And did you accomplish anything of actual value during the last 5 games? Maybe not. But I think even if you want to disqualify the young guys getting minutes, that's fine. But that's quantifiable. That's something you can actually build off of.
I agree.
And and Tyler even losing his trade value. You know what? Now you have a clearer assessment, perhaps, as a front office. You said you could have gone into the playoffs, or had you missed out on the playoffs, there could still be the mystery box behind the curtain that you didn't know what Tyler could be because he wasn't available last postseason and he was looking forward to this opportunity. Now you have that clearer picture. Does it help? Time will tell if you're able to move him for somebody else. But I mean, those are actual things that the front office needs. The playoff can determine what your value is within the greater scheme of things and within the hierarchy of the roster. And I think we saw players either lose value or increase their value, like in case of Nico and Jaime Jaquez. I think both those guys showed that they could play at a higher level and be playoff contributors, whereas Tyler maybe took a step back. And as a result, I think now you have a much more fair assessment of what kind of a player he is.
I don't think he lost value in this series. I think front offices are smarter than that. I don't think they look at 5 games against an outmatched team, an undermanned roster. I think we knew what his value was last summer when the Heat had a hard time trading him. The Damian Lillard deal. I think we already pretty much knew that. The value is the young guy getting reps. That's a great answer. That's a serious answer. That's necessary if these guys are actually part of your core. And you're talking about building trade value. Jovic and Jaquez did, because now other front offices did learn these guys are playoff players. So if those guys are somebody that the front office is potentially looking to move, they definitely increased their trade value in these playoffs. And by the way, can I just say, vibes? How about that? Did we all forget how awesome that Game 2 win was in Boston? That was great. That was worth the price of admission, baby.
Yeah.
Heck yeah. The playoffs are the playoffs, man. We got 2 playoff home games. They lost, but at least we got to go. There's value in that. There's value in making the playoffs. Ken writes in, this has been an interesting season. What are some positive takeaways from the year? We're going to reflect on all of this as we kind of go forward, but just like sort of your quick off the dome answer.
I don't know. No, I really don't know. I mean, I think Nico and Jaime are probably the more obvious ones.
Got a star in here. Got a guy in Hotels.com ads now.
I think that's basically it. Other than that, you've made the point a lot, and I think it's a fair one. Like, this season never really happened, in a lot of ways. Because no, I mean, it happened certainly, but
I don't know. We
never really saw it. Yeah, from the point of the offseason to like falling short on the Dame Lillard and everything else that led up to that, and then the injuries. It's like there was always like, okay, well, the 82 games don't really count, perhaps because the postseason is really where it really matters, and maybe we'll see this team turn it around like they did last year. And then Jimmy gets hurt right as the playoffs start. So it's like, it was a weird lost season in many, many ways, and so it's kind of hard to take away a lot of positives. But if you're looking at any, I think Nico developing within the course of a year and Jaime being a ready plug-in player from day one, I think those are positives.
Arthur writes in, Jaime Jaquez Jr. starter or a sixth man?
Jaime Jaquez Jr. is a sixth man.
I think I'm with you. Because Jimmy Butler's on the roster, I
Yes.
don't really know where Jaime fits in. Now,
Yes.
if Jimmy's not on this roster, he could be your starting small forward. I don't love him as a starting power forward, although in certain small ball lineups you can get there. I just don't want to start that small. That makes me a little uncomfortable, especially when you're undersized across the board positionally anyway. But for right now, sixth man, and a really good one. I mean, we saw him this year play backup point guard, essentially. You running offense through him. I mean, that's exactly kind of what you want out of a sixth man. And with that size as a sixth man, it's more of a plus than a negative, as opposed to putting him in as your other forward next to Jimmy potentially. Let's see. Let's get to this question. Yeah, now look, who writes in, this one comes from Twitter. Did this team deserve a better ending to this run after all the wins against the odds and the great runs? Is being shorthanded and beat down by the Celtics the worst way for this group to go out?
No. I mean, it could have been worse. Ultimately, I think, I don't know if deserve never really plays into it. This isn't, we're not talking about Nobel Peace Prize winners or anything like that. They're basketball players, and ascribing that kind of value is not is a foolhardy thing there. I don't. They showed a lot of grit and tenacity last year, and a lot of magic, and a lot of great memories for their fan base, and for around the league. Like, I mean, whatever. Celtics fans will gripe because that's what they do. Bucks fans will gripe because that's what they do. New York Knicks fans, that's what they do. But for the other fan bases outside of the Eastern Conference, they were really impressed by what Miami was able to accomplish, what Jimmy was able to do, what Bam did, and in all fairness, like him being able to guard Nikola Jokic in the finals and to make him work. And still, I mean, he was dominant, but I think a lot of people were impressed by Miami's overall run. It's only the teams that they've beaten the Eastern Conference and their fans that go, oh, so lucky or so glad to have Miami been beaten like this. Other than that, I think, they were a really good team. They showed a lot of grit. And as far as this year is concerned, they didn't deserve anything. They were hurt. They could have played better during the regular season, even despite the injuries. And had they avoided the play-in, who knows what might have happened, but they were in the play-in. Jimmy gets hurt, and now we'll never know whether or not they might have been able to challenge Boston a little bit better than they did.
Yep. It's disappointing if this is indeed the end of this run for Miami. And we don't know that it is. I do think that we're gonna get some changes here. I will say that. Barry Jackson tweeted this earlier today. This is Tim Reynolds tweeted it after the game. Barry Jackson retweeted it, and then I retweeted it. This is Pat Riley before the season started. Quote, if you build a team around one or two players, three players, and you don't win the championship, then you might have to start thinking, okay, this is not going to work. This is not going to happen. We have talked about that quote quite a bit on this show. I think that this front office is going to be very motivated to switch things up. What does that look like exactly? We don't know. But to answer the part of the question, if this is the end of whatever this era is, however we define it, then you're right. It's not deserve. Very few of these things ever go out with the storybook ending. It usually looks a lot like this: injured and with a whimper, right? Like that tends to be how eras conclude, right? Exactly. Golden State didn't even make the playoffs. You know what I mean? Right. And so this tends to be how it happens. And if it does happen, then it happens. But I mean, it doesn't take away from anything that happened during this era either.
Do you want to get into that discussion? Because I mean, I know I made a point via Twitter about running it back.
Yeah. So let's do it. I want to answer two more questions really quick. You know what? Actually, wait. I got all right. Before we get to that, I just have this question for you. Cuban sandwiches are overrated. I prefer mine with mayo. Like, what is that?
That's a Celtics fan. I don't care. No,
is that a Celtics fan take? Is that a thing?
Absolutely. Yeah. Why? It's got to be. Like, I mean, nobody from Miami that's had a Cuban sandwich. Yeah. No. Yeah. like even the Tampa version of the Cuban sandwich is wrong. I don't remember exactly what it is they do different. I think they put like salami in theirs. Get the hell out of here. That's not a Cuban sandwich. I don't even eat meat, and I know that's not a Cuban sandwich.
Tampa Cuban sandwich. All right. Maybe this is an off-air conversation. Okay. I agree. You don't need mayonnaise in a Cuban sandwich.
Yeah.
Running it back. Well, let's just do these quick. Cool writes in. Could Herro lead a trade for Beal or Levine if those teams are looking to move on? I'll tell you this. If the Heat called Phoenix or Chicago and offered Tyler Herro for Beal and Levine, both of them would say yes and call it into the commissioner themselves. They are so motivated to get off those contracts that they would jump at the opportunity to do it. And to add a player like Tyler Herro, who's may or may not be as good as those players, I think it's pretty similar, honestly. Like where Herro is going and where those guys are going, there's not that much of a difference. So if the Heat wanted to do it, they could absolutely do it. But I would strongly doubt that they do it. They were not interested in taking on Beal's no-trade clause before the season, which is why Beal is not in a Heat jersey right now. And they never really seriously kicked the tires on Zach LaVine because his contract is so big and onerous and longer than Tyler Herro. If you have a problem with Tyler Herro's contract, go on Spotrac, look at the Beal deal, look at the LaVine deal. You're going to want to get out of that real quick. This question comes from C. Dalla, who writes in, Herro, Rozier, and Duncan for Spider Mitchell. This is what we're talking about. The Cavs would absolutely say no to that. That's not happening. There's no reason for the Cavs. To get Donovan Mitchell, it's going to cost draft picks, probably all of them. The Heat could trade up to 3 first-round picks this summer. And at least one, and probably 2 of the young guys with Jaime Jaquez and Nikola Jovic. Plus one of those guys, Herro, Rozier, or Duncan, to get the salaries to match. So that's the big question. It's not would you trade Tyler, Terry, and Duncan for Donovan Mitchell. It's would you trade the young pieces, one of those guys, and 2 or 3 of those draft picks that you're able to trade this year for Donovan Mitchell. And I think you can come down on either side of that with a reasonable answer, but that's the right question to ask. All right. You want to do the run it back thing? Let's do it.
I could save that for another episode too. I think that's a conversation that I think has a lot of nuance, and we can wait until next week when we start getting into the heavy reads of everything else. I think it's an important conversation to have, mostly because, again, incorporating a lot of what we talked about today, the likelihood of a deal, however that might be viewed as the right move or the likely move or anything else like that, I think you also have to consider like the possibility of Tyler's value being lower than the fan base kind of collectively sees it, or even however the front office sees it. And given that, the problem with this roster, at least from my perspective, was that you were counting on role players to do a lot more because your star and Jimmy Butler wasn't available. And your secondary star in Tyler Herro didn't live up to those expectations either. And then I don't even know what to call him, your other complimentary scorer and Terry Rozier wasn't available either. So there was a lot there. Like, I've said this point, and I think you've agreed with me. I still think that this roster is deeper than last year's, despite the finals run.
100%.
We just never saw it. We never saw it,
Theoretically deeper than last year. Yeah. That's my biggest disappointment of the year is I never really got to enjoy this team at full strength for a sustained amount of time. And that's a bummer, man. Like I said, this team had I had no problem with running it back after last year's finals run. It would have been nice to get Damian Lillard, sure. Those improvements are always welcome.
Yep.
But I was looking forward to what this team can do, and it never really got that healthy chance to do it. Your point about the role players stepping up, so much shade thrown at Caleb Martin and Haywood Highsmith and whatever random player. And it's like, what do you expect from these guys? Do you expect Caleb Martin to go out there and beat Jimmy Butler? Of course that's not going to happen. But he's been forced to play that role way too many times. And Stan Van Gundy said this on the broadcast, and I'm glad he gave voice to it because I've made fun of the next man up thing for a long time. That we have enough. It's cute, but it's not true. It's not real.
Yes.
Like next man up only works for the next man up, but not the next man up's next man up. And not that guy's next man up. And that's just so often and that's how you end up with Haywood Highsmith posting up against Jason Tatum in game 4 of the first round of the playoffs. That was never his job. The development program is great. Haywood Highsmith was never groomed to be an isolation scorer, and yet he had to be several times in this stupid series.
Right. DeLon Wright was waived by the Washington Wizards. What they win 19 games this year? he was waived by that team, and he started a do or die game for Miami. Haywood Highsmith played a lot of minutes. Patty Mills was waived by the Atlanta Hawks. Didn't even make the playoffs.
50 minutes in game 4 between Patty Mills and DeLon Wright. Good players, solid players, nice guys who were cut by the Wizards and the Hawks this year.
I still want DeLon back. I want DeLon back.
I want DeLon back too. Now that he got into conditioning, which is why he was out of the rotation, and everybody was wondering why he just wasn't hitting the conditioning standards for the Miami Heat. And then he did, and then he was great. And the family connection is always nice, and I want him back on the minimum. Last thing here, Isaiah writes in: do you think the Heat get Kevin Durant?
No, I mean,
probably
Suns
not. I mean,
owner,
betting is against it. Yeah.
Phoenix Suns owner basically saying today, we want to build around these three, our big three, calling them our big three. I mean, which is somewhat dubious considering Bradley Beal's performance, but let's just say they have their big three there, and that they want to maximize KD in a way that he's never been maximized, which is also patently ridiculous considering he was an MVP level player and he won 2 championships in Golden State. So I think he's been maximized throughout his career, but somehow wanting to unlock KD even more, that does not reek of, man, we can't wait to get off that contract.
Yeah, it's such a good point. It's all speculation of Kevin Durant being on the move, and I know that there was a report that if he gets traded, Miami would be the favorite, and it's like, whatever. Like, there's so many qualifiers that even if he gets traded, Miami would be. It's like, that's okay. It's all fake fairy tale stuff.
Heat fans better root for the Orlando Magic. How about that? That's if you want a superstar trade, you better root for the Orlando Magic to put the clamps on Donovan Mitchell.
Oh, I see what you mean.
That's the likeliest.
No,
move
Donovan
there.
Mitchell is the likeliest guy. I don't see the Suns moving off of Kevin Durant or Bradley Beal or Donovan Mitchell or Devin Booker.
Yeah,
because they're locked in. They're locked into that roster, and for a lot of reasons that Locked On Suns can get into. But I don't think they're trading any of those guys. Do we re-sign Caleb Martin? We'll see. He's probably going to opt out. It's a $7 million player option for next year. He's probably going to opt out, get a longer-term, more lucrative deal. He's certainly going to be able to get that, I think, on the open market. So that's going to be out there. The Heat right now, $5 million away from the second tax apron. So if they give Caleb Martin a raise, they will not be able to do that. Basically, they can't offer him the raise without going into that second tax apron, and we know that they're not going to do that. And that's not just because Mickey Harrison is quote-unquote cheap or something like that. That's because of the roster limitations that come along with it. You don't get to use a mid-level exception. You don't get to aggregate salaries in outside trades. You're not allowed to bring more money back than you're sending out in trades. It's too limiting to a front office. So he's going to opt out. Do the Heat make some sort of budget-saving move in order to bring Caleb Martin back? That could potentially be a possibility. But as the roster is currently constructed, it's going to be very hard to bring Caleb Martin back. Maybe more realistic to bring Haywood Highsmith back. But
somebody
Caleb back
pointed out
difficult.
that we hyped him up after last year, I think with good reason. Like, he played out of his mind last year.
Did you watch him last year?
Yeah, he certainly outperformed expectations. He certainly was really good in the postseason against the same Boston Celtics that are very happy tonight. I think he was hurt. I think he was hurt for most of the year. And again, he probably was thrust into a larger role than he was qualified to play. And I think he was hurt. And on top of that, he just underperformed.
We've also seen the Heat comfortably walk away from developmental prospects recently. Gabe Vincent, Max Strus, because of the concerns with their position against the salary cap.
You could go get your money. Go get your money.
Go get your money. More power to you. We're happy to have helped your career.
Come back in 4 years.
You were great for us, and but we've got a development program, and we've got guys in the pipeline, and we'll just find the next one. Basically, is the mission statement here. All right, let's end it there. We've got so much more to carve into throughout the offseason. We will stay 5 days a week throughout the playoffs, so do not leave us. Thank you to everybody who followed along and listened and watched the show all season long, for the games, for the recaps, staying up late at night for some of our live streams, waking up early, making us your first listen every day. We're not going anywhere. We've got a ton to talk about over the next few months. For now, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Follow us on your podcast app.